A number of years ago, I think it was early 2005, I was web surfing, going down that rabbit hole that I'm pretty sure a lot of us have found ourselves in. And, sometimes an hour or three or a day later, you realize how much time you've spent. And yeah, it's sometimes a hard hole to crawl out of. Anyway, so I was web surfing. I can't tell you what it was I originally started looking for. I was probably working on a sermon and probably doing some research. While I was doing that, something popped up that I'd never heard of before. Prayer shawl. I had no idea really what a prayer shawl was. I mean, the two words put together kind of gave me an idea, but I honestly didn't know. So I decided to follow that rabbit hole a little further and a little deeper. And the more I discovered, the more interested I became. Well, eventually I got off the computer that day and put things aside, went back to working on whatever it was I was working on. But that niggling started, that prayer shawl thing kept coming to the forefront of my mind. And so every once in a while, I would go back and do a little more digging. And one day, when I was doing some digging, I came upon a website that was focused entirely on prayer shawl ministries. And within probably seconds of reading what was on that site, I knew in my head that I had to do something with this. This idea had not left me alone for several days, weeks, maybe even months. It had nagged at me. And this prayer shawl ministry site affirmed for me that I needed to do something with it. So I read more and I decided St. James Rosemount needs this. Our church needs to do this. We can do this. I had myself all convinced by the time I was done reading through everything on that site. Yeah, we can do this. And then I walked away from the computer. And then the doubts started. Wait a minute. We can do this. Sure, we can. I haven't knit since I was a kid, and I wasn't very good at it then. I'm sure not going to be any better at it now when I haven't knit for probably 30 years. Used to be a pretty good crocheter. Haven't crocheted a thing in years. What am I thinking? I can't do this. And the doubts continued. Okay, so who am I going to go to at church that wouldn't think this is a dumb idea? There's a lot of work involved in this. At least I thought so at the time. Who's going to want to add that to their plate? So the more the doubts came, the more I convinced myself, maybe it's not such a good idea. It's a great idea, but maybe I'm not the one. Kind of like Grover in our children's story. Don't turn the page. So I walked away from it. But apparently, I wasn't the one in charge because the idea kept coming back. And interestingly enough, I would be searching for something random, and somewhere along the line, that prayer shawl thing would pop up. And so I realized I can't just drop this. I have to do something with it. So at the time, this was now 2005, and I'd been waffling with this and wallowing in it and walking away from it for months. It could have been early 2005. It could have even been late 2004 when I started. At any rate, in 2005, my dear friend Charmian Patrick was the chair of Mission and Outreach. And I thought to myself, rightly so, if anybody's going to listen to me about this half-baked idea, Charm will. She'll listen to me. And she did. And she didn't laugh at me. And she didn't think it was a dumb idea. And she didn't say, "What are you thinking? That's way too much work." She loved the idea. She embraced it. She encouraged me to take it to the board, and without hesitation, we took it on as a ministry at St. James Rosemount United Church in 2005. So from there, I realized right from the beginning that I can't do this alone. I was never meant to do it alone. So I went about starting to reteach myself how to crochet and reteach myself how to knit. I won't tell you some of the words that I used as I was going through that exercise, but I will share with you that a lot of the words had nothing to do with prayer and don't belong in a prayer. And so there were times when I almost gave up because I was afraid I'm just never going to be good enough to do this. Who's going to want a shawl that looks like that? And then a few other people heard about what I was trying to start and said, "I can knit. I'd love to knit those. I can crochet. I'd love to crochet those." And that's kind of where it went from there. That's kind of where it started. That's how it started to grow, because other people had gifts that the minute they heard that idea, they knew they wanted to be a part of it, and they decided that they would share it. So we started crocheting and we started knitting, and the shawls started piling up, which was wonderful. But the next step had to happen, because it didn't feel right when these were going to be gifts made with our hands, but gifts from God, delivered through the church. We are the hands and feet of Christ, delivered through us, but truly a gift from God, a gift of love, a gift of compassion from God. So they had to be blessed. And so the blessings started in 2005. Done differently than we do them now, but the shawls were definitely blessed by the congregation before they went out to anyone who was going to receive one, which kind of takes me to the next step. Once these shawls were made and they had all been blessed, and now it was a case of, well, how am I going to find out who needs them? How am I going to get them there? And once people knew what the shawls were for, that these really, in simplest terms, are a hug from God. That's what they are. They are that wrap yourself up and embrace yourself hug from God to you, the receiver. And the names started pouring in. People who had a family member who needed support, who needed to know they weren't alone. Somebody who was celebrating something, because prayer shawls aren't just for the grieving and the sick and the lonely. They are, as every gift of love is, they are given in celebration and in joy, and a gift that just goes to someone because they are who they are. You're an amazing person. You are my best friend. You are the rock that I lean on. Those reasons. Shawls go out for those reasons too. So we carried on, and shawls were delivered originally kind of in the stealth of night. And that was intentional. They were wrapped in brown paper and often were found in someone's mailbox or hanging on the door or tucked away somewhere that the owner, the intentional owner, would find them. But the delivery piece was quiet. And that allowed the focus to be on the shawl and the blessings that the congregation had put on that shawl. There were times when shawls would go out and we never heard a story. That's not what we wanted back. We just knew somehow, we continue to know that the shawls are doing what they're intended. And the intent again is to share that gift of love that we are all given from God. But there were some times when a story was shared that I'm going to share with you now, hoping I don't start to cry. Because sometimes I think you need to know. You need to know the impact you have on people. Someone might not know that you're the one that blessed that shawl or that you were part of that prayer in that shawl, but they know the prayer is there and they know the blessing is there. So one of my first experiences with knowing that the shawl had truly been a gift to the recipient, there was a gentleman that his name came to me. He worked with someone that's close to me. His wife actually worked with someone that's very close to me. And he was a man in his late 60s, early 70s, and he'd been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. And there was no nice way out of it. It was terminal. He was a man that was faithful. He certainly believed in God, but he wasn't what I'm going to say a churchgoer. Silent and strong in his faith, I suppose, is one way of describing him, a good way of describing him. And so I made sure that both he and his wife got a prayer shawl with a card on it that explained that it was from the church and that this was our way of showing that we may not know you, but we are praying for you. And this is a hug from God. I had no way of knowing until a year after that what the impact really was of that shawl on this man's life. It turns out that after he opened the package and realized what it was, it never left his side. Never. To the point where one of his dying wishes was that it be buried with him. And I happened to go to the visitation after he had died. And there, on a chair, his chair, in the funeral home, they brought his chair in, placed it by the casket, and his shawl was draped over the back of the chair the way it had been at home when he was in a place where the shawl wasn't functional, maybe in the shower, for example. And the shawl was beside the casket, and he was buried with it. I don't think I will ever forget that story. That to me epitomized the beginning and the end of what those shawls are to be. The beginning being that gift of love that's called to make the shawl, the gift of compassion that's called to bless the shawl, the gift of giving that takes that shawl from our care to the receiver. It all was full circle, sort of. There was another time more recently when we were doing a blessing of shawls at church. And I love the way we do them when we're together, when the shawls can go through the congregation, and it starts with our young people at the front. And one particular young person was really struggling at home for a number of reasons. And when that shawl got to her, she shared this story with her family member later. When that shawl got to her from Reverend Chris and we were blessing them, she said when she was done that she felt every prayer in that shawl as it laid on her. And that from a young child. So they understand far more than we think. Those prayers and those blessings are more than just words that you say. They truly are the sharing of love and the sharing of compassion. They are a gift that you are giving, selflessly giving. There was another recipient of a shawl who isn't local. In fact, she lives on the East Coast. And again, this one was a cancer patient, and her condition was terminal. And her brother and sister-in-law had told her that this package was coming. They did tell her in advance that it was a prayer shawl. They didn't say a whole lot more than that. But this was a woman who was very, very strong in her faith. And for as many years as she had been able, was a faithful churchgoer and supporter and volunteer, very active in her church. And so the day that the package arrived in the mail for her, she insisted, as weak as she was, she insisted that she be the one to open that package. She didn't want any help. She wanted to be the one to open the package because she wanted your prayers and your blessings, every single one of them, to come pouring out of that package and embrace her. And she too wore her shawl until her final days. That gift of love, that gift of compassion. And so why am I sharing these stories? It's not because I want you to cry. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm sharing these stories because I think it's important for you to know, again, what those prayers and what those blessings mean. I think it's important for you to know that your support and your encouragement and your belief in this ministry is the whole reason that 15 years later, it's still very much a vital part of the life and the love and the works of St. James Rosemount United Church. You might not crochet. You might not knit, but you can pray and you can bless. And those are gifts of love. You can share names of people who are in need or who are celebrating or who just need to be reminded that they're not alone. That's a gift of compassion that you're giving out by sharing that name, by just speaking that name and sharing it with someone. That is a gift that you're sharing. Don't ever discount that. It's just as important as the gift of picking up a crochet hook or picking up a pair of needles and a ball of yarn and creating the shawl. That gift is important. It's equally as important that the person who delivers that shawl get it to the person it was intended for. We don't always know who the recipient's going to be when we start a shawl. We trust. We trust in the Spirit that the shawl that is intended for the owner, that the two will come together somehow, some way. And when you're the one that gives a name and you're the one that chooses that shawl, you happen to be the link there. You happen to be the carrier of that gift, the giver of that gift, the gift of compassion. There aren't always times and ways that we can find tangible examples of what compassion looks like other than giving someone a hug or listening to them or sharing a meal. Those things right now in this COVID time are very difficult to do. But a prayer shawl wraps them all into one very neatly woven package. That gift of love and gift of compassion comes through in every stitch, in every prayer, in every blessing. That list of gifts from God. And you continue to do it each and every time a shawl is knit or crocheted, every time it's blessed, every time it's given in love and compassion. I'm not even sure thank you is enough. You are an important part of this ministry, no matter what role you play. Every role is important. And again, you're the reason, each one of you is the reason that 15 years later, we're still sharing this. We are still giving out this gift. And to go back to that song again, the magic penny, love is something if you give it away. There's that feeling that you have every time a shawl leaves. You know it's going to the place it belongs. That's an incredible feeling. And you want it to keep going, and thanks to you it is. I have a number of shawls with me, I'm surrounded by them right now. And in a moment, I am going to adjust the camera and I'm going to pass them by my hands and give you moments and time to bless them as you see them with your own personal blessing. I will share one with you. I will also share with you my thoughts on blessings. Anyone and everyone can and should extend them. They too are a gift given to us to give to others. That's what a blessing is for. And you don't have to have a fancy title. You don't have to have a special education. All you have to do is be aware and appreciate. And in that blessing, share that gift of love that God has given you to give to others. There's nothing to be afraid of when you are sharing God's love with someone who not only needs it, but deserves it. We all need it. We can all share it. Before we begin the blessing, I will let you know that these shawls will spend a safe time in quarantine before they find their way to whoever it is that is intended to have this shawl. And so as I pass them, I invite you to say a blessing, to say a prayer, to simply appreciate the love that God gives us and intends us to share with others. And sometimes the sharing can be done very quietly. And in very simple ways. And as these pass by, I will offer this blessing. There are blessings meant for you to hold on to, clutched like a lifeline, carried like a candle to light a dark way, tucked into a pocket like a smooth stone, reminding you that you do not go alone. This blessing is not one of those. This and these blessings will find their form only as you give them away, only as you release it. Release it into the keeping of another, only as you let it leave you, bearing the shape, the imprint, the grace it will take only for having passed through your two particular hands, only for having been touched by your prayers and by your blessings. May these gifts, these blessings, always serve as a reminder to not only the crafter, but to those who created the yarn, to those who created the patterns, to those who have offered blessings and prayers. May they always be a reminder of the love, the unconditional love that we are called to share. That most precious gift, that invaluable, endless resource, that love given to us by God, shared with us by God. Tangible hugs, crafted in prayer and given in love. Amen.